At the corner of a sleepy city street, a small cafe buzzed with its usual quiet charm. The soft clinking of plates and silverware echoed through the space, a soundtrack to the otherwise calm afternoon. The air carried the comforting aroma of espresso mingling with the scent of freshly baked pastries. Yet for Dinah, the usual warmth of the cafe had long faded. Her shift had stretched on, each minute passing like an hour, and her body ached from standing for so long. The gentle hum of activity around her barely registered as her mind fixated on the growing pile of bills at home. Rent was due in 2 days, and the weight of overdue payments pressed on her chest. The tips had been sparse that day, mostly loose change left behind by patrons engrossed in their phones, too absorbed in their digital worlds to acknowledge the woman serving them. It was always the same. As she wiped down the last table near the window, her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket, a reminder of the looming financial worries. Her fingers brushed her ponytail tighter, attempting to ease the tension in her shoulders. Her manager, a woman with weathered eyes and an understanding glance, offered Dinah an unspoken encouragement. "Hang in there." Dinah nodded without looking up, her movements automatic, almost as if she were on autopilot. Just as the silence seemed to stretch too long, the familiar ding of the cafe door echoed. It snapped Dinah out of her trance. A young man entered, standing tall and lean, his presence subtle yet undeniable. He wore a simple, unassuming shirt and slacks, exuding an effortless style. Behind him, 2 men entered, their eyes scanning the room sharply, almost invisible to the untrained eye. The trio moved with a quiet confidence, but something about this man stood out. He was the type of customer who didn't belong in this humble cafe, a place where ordinary people came to relax, not high-profile figures. For a brief moment, Dinah froze. Could it be? She recognized his features, but couldn't place it immediately. He looked familiar. The realization hit her like a sudden wave. This was Barron Trump, the son of the former president. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen his face plastered across news outlets for years. Now, here he was, sitting quietly in her cafe, as though he were just another customer. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Should she act differently? Should she make a bigger deal of it? But then, her training kicked in. She wasn't here to be starstruck. She was here to do her job. This was just another customer. No more, no less. Pushing aside the flutter of nerves that had taken root, Dinah took a deep breath and walked toward his table, her pen poised to take the order. "Good afternoon," she said, forcing a smile as she approached. Her voice wavered slightly, but she quickly masked it with professionalism. "Can I get you something to start?" Barron looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. She felt a strange sensation ripple through her. His gaze was calm, steady, but there was something in it that made her feel acknowledged. His demeanor was unlike most of the hurried customers she dealt with, glued to their phones or laptops. He had a presence that was easy to miss but impossible to ignore. "I'll have a cappuccino, and maybe one of those croissants," Barron said, his voice soft, polite, but surprisingly warm. There was no rush in his words, no air of entitlement, just a simple request, accompanied by a small but genuine smile. "Anything else?" Dinah asked, doing her best to keep her voice steady. "No, that'll be perfect. Thank you," he replied. His words were brief but sincere, and there was something about his calmness that stood in stark contrast to the usual frenzy of the cafe. Dinah quickly jotted down the order, trying to push the strange energy away, but her heart was still racing. She moved toward the counter, preparing the cappuccino, her thoughts spinning. She glanced back toward Barron's table, her mind still in overdrive. Why was she feeling so flustered? Barron Trump, of all people. As she worked, the steam from the cappuccino machine hissed softly, a comforting sound that should have helped to center her, but it didn't. She found herself distracted, glancing back at the corner table where Barron sat quietly sipping water. Looking out the window, his stillness was captivating. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't fidgeting. He was just there, present, taking in the simple moments others often overlooked. By the time the cappuccino and croissant were ready, Dinah had managed to collect herself, though her heart still beat faster than usual. She carefully balanced the tray and approached Barron's table. "Here you go," she said softly, placing the cup and pastry before him. He looked up again, his smile faint but genuine. "Thank you." "You're welcome," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral, though the warmth in her chest was growing. As she turned to walk away, something made her pause. Barron's gaze lingered on her, calm and curious. It wasn't invasive, but it held something else, something kind. For a moment, she wasn't sure if it was his eyes that made her heart flutter, or if it was just exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. As she continued with her duties, cleaning tables and refilling sugar containers, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Barron wasn't just another customer. There was a subtle, almost unspoken connection. The cafe grew quieter again, and Dinah found herself lost in thought. That was when she noticed Barron, his pen out, scribbling something on the receipt. He wrote quickly, folded the paper neatly, and tucked it under his empty coffee cup. He stood, collected his coat and phone, and made his way to the door. Dinah was still in a daze. As he passed by, she softly called out, "Thank you for coming." Barron turned back just slightly, offering another smile. "Have a good day," he said. The moment was brief, but for some reason, it stuck with her, lingering far longer than it should have. She watched him leave, his security team close behind. As the bell above the door chimed one last time, the cafe felt empty, the silence almost suffocating. Dinah exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the strange weight in her chest. She approached the table to clear it, the cappuccino cup now empty, the croissant plate dotted with crumbs. But then she noticed it, the folded receipt beneath the cup. Her hand shook as she picked it up, expecting just another regular receipt, maybe a decent tip. But as she unfolded it, her heart skipped a beat. The tip was generous, far more than she'd ever expected, but it was the note, written in neat handwriting, that left her breathless. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Tears welled up in her eyes. She read the note again, slower this time, savoring each word. It wasn't just the money, it was the recognition, the empathy. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, in a way she never imagined. She felt a warmth that she hadn't experienced in a long time, like a small glimmer of hope piercing through the fog of her daily struggles. As the tears fell, she clutched the note tightly, knowing that she would carry these words with her for a long time to come. "Good afternoon," Dinah greeted with a smile that was a little more forced than usual, her voice a tad strained from the long hours of her shift. She tried to keep her tone polite, despite the fluttering in her chest. "Can I get you something to start?" The man looked up, and for a brief moment, everything around her seemed to slow. His features were striking, sharp, but in a calm, understated way, and that's when it hit her. The familiarity of his face, the way he carried himself. Barron Trump. She had seen him on TV countless times, in news stories and headlines. The son of the former president. Her breath caught, and her heart skipped a beat. She shook off the surprise quickly, straightening up. "This is just another customer. Nothing special," she reminded herself. But even as the words settled in her mind, her pulse quickened. "I'll just have a cappuccino," Barron said, his voice low and polite. "And maybe one of those croissants." His words were simple, but there was a warmth in them, an easy kindness that made Dinah pause. His tone wasn't rushed or demanding, unlike many other customers who couldn't be bothered to even look up from their phones. Instead, Barron spoke as though he had all the time in the world. His voice had an authenticity to it, a genuineness that unsettled her. She scribbled down the order, her hand shaking just slightly. "Why was I nervous?" she thought. "He's just a customer." As she moved toward the counter, preparing the cappuccino, her thoughts drifted back to him. Dinah couldn't help it. She kept glancing over at his table. What was it about him? Why did he make her feel so disoriented? Barron Trump, of all people. She had worked in this cafe long enough to serve all sorts of customers, but he was different. Her mind wandered again. He wasn't glued to a phone screen or a tablet like most patrons who seemed more interested in their devices than the world around them. Barron was sitting there, quietly observing, his eyes fixed on the outside world. lost in thought. From time to time, he would sip his water, but it was his stillness that struck Dinah the most. There was a certain calmness in the way he carried himself, almost as though he wasn't in a rush. No fuss, no need for constant distraction. Most of the people who came into this cafe were in and out, attached to their screens, disengaged from everything happening in the space around them. But Barron sat there with an almost peaceful presence, his posture relaxed but deliberate. There was something so grounded about him. It made Dinah feel small and invisible in comparison, like she was being reminded of everything she had let slip by in her own life. She shook her head, trying to focus on the task at hand. Come on, Dinah, she thought. Just make the coffee. Focus on the job. The cappuccino machine hissed as steam filled the air, and Dinah worked in rhythm, trying to shake the unease building in her chest. She felt like a fly caught in a web of thoughts she couldn't unravel. Barron's presence kept pulling her attention back. He wasn't like other customers. There was something more to him, something she couldn't put her finger on. As she frothed the milk, she couldn't help but look up again. Barron was still sitting there, his gaze distant, as if the cafe was nothing more than a backdrop to his thoughts. His quiet energy was in stark contrast to the usual chaos Dinah was used to. She found herself staring at him, her mind spinning. Why does it feel so different with him? When she finished preparing his cappuccino and croissant, Dinah tried to settle her nerves. She walked over to his table, balancing the tray carefully, and placed it in front of him. Here you go, she said, offering a smile that felt more natural this time, though her heart was still racing. Barron looked up, acknowledging her with a soft smile. Thank you, he said, his voice smooth and easy. You're welcome, she replied, the words flowing out like they had been rehearsed 1,000 times. But there was something different now. As she turned to walk away, something lingered in the air. Barron's eyes were on her, not with judgment or expectation, but with quiet curiosity. That's when Dinah realized something about him had made her forget to be professional for just a moment. He wasn't like any other customer she had served, and she didn't know why she was so affected. She couldn't pinpoint it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The cafe grew quiet once more as she moved to tidy up other tables, the usual hum of background chatter turning into a low murmur. But Dinah couldn't stop herself from glancing back toward Barron. There was a subtle magnetism to his presence, and she couldn't shake the pull. What was it about him that made her feel so much more aware of herself? A few minutes passed. Dinah focused on cleaning, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. But as she turned around to take a quick glance in Barron's direction, she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. He was writing on the receipt with a pen. She watched as he scribbled something quickly, folding it neatly, then tucking it under his empty coffee cup. He stood, gathered his things, his phone, his coat, and prepared to leave. Dinah was rooted to the spot, the sensation of his presence lingering in the air like a weight. She forced herself to move, to act, to get back to work. Stay calm. As Barron passed her table, she softly called out, "Thank you for coming." Barron turned back just slightly, offering one more smile. "Have a good day," he said before stepping toward the door. Her mind swam as she watched him leave. The door chimed as he stepped out, but Dinah remained frozen, the silence suddenly deafening. Her gaze returned to the table. She cleared the cappuccino cup and the croissant plate, but then she saw it, the folded receipt lying beneath the cup. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, not expecting what was inside. The tip was generous, more than she could have imagined. But it wasn't the money that caught her off guard. It was the note. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Her heart fluttered as she read the words again, slowly, letting them sink in. For the first time in what felt like forever, Dinah didn't feel invisible. Someone had noticed her, truly noticed her. And that small gesture, those simple words, made everything she had been struggling with feel a little less heavy. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sank into the chair across from where Barron had Saturday, clutching the receipt to her chest. She had never expected something like this, especially not from someone like him. But there it was, proof that even in the toughest of times, a little kindness could go a long way. The cappuccino was finally ready. the foam just the right amount of creamy and smooth. Dinah carefully balanced the tray and, with a soft breath, made her way over to Barron's table. She set the coffee and croissant in front of him with a quiet, "Here you go." He looked up, meeting her gaze, his expression calm, almost thoughtful. A faint smile curled at the corners of his lips. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm, genuine. "You're welcome," Dinah replied, trying to keep her composure, though her heart was racing in her chest. She turned to walk back to the counter, but something made her pause. There was something about the way his eyes lingered on her, curious but not intrusive. It was as if he was actually seeing her, not just the waitress behind the counter. A strange warmth spread through her chest, unexpected and intense. The cafe grew quiet again, the hum of the usual activity replaced by the soft sound of background music. The atmosphere now gentle and calm. Dinah moved about the cafe, tidying up tables and refilling sugar containers. But her mind was elsewhere. It kept drifting back to Barron. There was something in the way he carried himself, something different. It wasn't just that he was a customer. There was an energy to him, a presence that made Dinah feel seen, something she hadn't felt in a long time. As he finished his croissant and cappuccino, Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen. He quickly scribbled something on the receipt, his movements swift, almost secretive, as if he didn't want anyone to notice. He folded the paper neatly, tucking it under his empty coffee cup before standing up. Gathering his phone and coat, he turned toward the door, his quiet departure almost serene. Dinah stood at the counter, still processing the encounter, the flutter of uncertainty lingering in her stomach. She forced herself to focus, her thoughts racing. She had served hundreds of customers like him before. Why did he feel so different? Her feet carried her instinctively toward his table, and as he passed by, she softly said, "Thank you for coming." Barron turned back toward her, his smile small but genuine. "Have a good day," he said, his tone polite but sincere. There was no arrogance, no sense of entitlement, just kindness. The words hung in the air, lingering longer than they should have. Dinah stood there for a moment, watching him leave, the bell above the door chiming as he stepped out, his security team following closely behind. Her mind felt foggy as she turned back to the table, clearing his empty cup and plate. But then she noticed it, the receipt was there, under the empty coffee cup, folded neatly. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up, unfolding the paper with a mix of curiosity and anticipation. What she found took her breath away. The tip was far more than she expected, generous to an almost unbelievable extent. But it wasn't just the money that caught her off guard, it was the note. Her fingers ran over the words as she read them again. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Dinah's chest tightened as she processed the note, each word sinking in. She couldn't believe it. This simple, quiet message had the power to undo the weight she had been carrying for so long. Here was a reminder that, despite the hardships and the endless days of struggle, someone saw her. Not just the waitress, not just a passing figure in the background, but her, the real person. She hadn't expected to find this kind of recognition from anyone, let alone someone like Barron Trump. But here it was, written in black ink: kindness, empathy, and hope. Tears blurred her vision as she sank into the chair across from where he had Saturday, holding the receipt close to her chest. The small piece of paper felt heavier than it should, not because of the money, but because of the message it carried. For the first time in a long while, Dinah felt seen. The door chime rang again, pulling her out of her reverie. She quickly wiped her eyes, tucking the note into her apron pocket before anyone could see. Her manager walked over, a concerned look on her face. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly, sensing something was different. Dinah hesitated for a second, trying to find the right words. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice cracked just a little. "Just a really generous tip." Her manager raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Generous enough to make you cry?" Dinah nodded, managing a shaky laugh as she reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded receipt, offering it to her manager. When her boss saw the amount, her eyes widened in disbelief. "No way." Who left this? The corner table? Dinah nodded quietly, her voice softer now. That was Barron Trump. Her manager blinked, stunned for a moment. Are you serious? She asked, almost as if she couldn't believe it herself. Dinah nodded again, but then pulled the note out from her apron. It's not just the money, she said, handing the note over carefully. It's what he wrote. Her manager read the note, her face softening with emotion. For the first time in months, Dinah saw genuine warmth in her boss's eyes. Wow, she whispered. That's something else. It really is. Dinah agreed, folding the note again carefully, as if it were a precious treasure. I don't even know why he wrote it. I didn't do anything special. Her manager looked at her for a long moment, a sense of understanding in her gaze. Sometimes people just know. Dinah, they see what you're going through, even when you think you're hiding it. You're here every day, working your tail off, always kind to customers, even the ones who don't deserve it. Maybe he saw that. Dinah's throat tightened, and she swallowed hard. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. For months, she had been treading water, barely making ends meet, juggling the pressure of rent, bills, and the responsibility of caring for her mom. She had stayed kind, even when she felt like she had nothing left to give. But she didn't realize how much it mattered until now. As the afternoon wore on, whispers spread through the cafe. A couple of co-workers exchanged excited glances, pointing toward the table where Barron had sat. Word of the generous tip and the note had already begun circulating. One barista approached, eyes wide with disbelief. You served him, didn't you? What did he say? Was he nice? Dinah simply smiled faintly. Yeah, he was really nice. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Each task felt lighter. The weight of the world on her shoulders momentarily lifted. When she finally finished her shift and took off her apron, she slipped the note back into her wallet. It would stay there, close to her heart, as a reminder of kindness, of the power that even the smallest gestures could have. As she made her way home, Dinah couldn't help but repeat Barron's words in her mind. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming. For the first time in a long time, she believed it. The next day, when the world seemed to shift again, her story going viral across social media, Dinah stayed grounded. She kept the note close, its message still resonating deep within her. Life would go on, but now, she had something real, something tangible to hold on to, something to remind her that even on the toughest days, she mattered. As Barron made his way toward the door, he turned back for a moment, offering her a warm, "Have a good day." His words, simple yet kind, hung in the air long after he left, the weight of them sinking into Dinah's chest. She watched as his security team followed him out, the bell above the door ringing softly in his wake. In that brief moment, the cafe felt strangely empty, the buzz of the usual conversations gone. It was as if time had briefly paused. Dinah exhaled deeply, trying to gather herself. She forced her thoughts back to the task at hand and approached the table to clear the remains of his meal. The cappuccino cup sat empty, the croissant plate reduced to crumbs. She reached for the receipt, expecting the usual, maybe a few coins left behind as a tip, but when she unfolded it, her breath caught in her throat. The numbers at the bottom of the receipt were staggering. The tip was generous beyond anything she had expected. But it wasn't just the amount that left her frozen. It was the words written above the number. Barron had written a note. Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming. Dinah's hands trembled as she read the note again, slowly, letting the words sink into her heart. Her gaze instinctively shifted to the door, where Barron had just walked out. And it was in that moment that her eyes filled with tears. The tears flowed freely, not from sadness, but from something far deeper, a sense of being seen. In the midst of all her struggles, someone had noticed her, acknowledged her effort, and offered a kind, encouraging word. For so long, Dinah had felt like just another face in the crowd, another waitress passing through life unnoticed, doing the work, serving the customers. But in this quiet cafe, in this quiet moment, Barron Trump had seen her, not just as a worker behind a counter, but as a person who mattered. She wasn't invisible anymore. The cafe, once alive with chatter, now seemed to hold its breath, the space quiet, save for the soft background music playing overhead. But for Dinah, this silence felt like a gentle companion, one that allowed her to process everything she had just experienced. The weight of the note settled in her chest, filling the hollow space she hadn't even realized existed. The tears she had fought back for so long were now flowing freely. But they weren't just tears of relief. They were tears of recognition, of a life that had been heavy for so long suddenly feeling lighter. For the first time in months, she felt hope stir within her. As the day wore on, the impact of Barron's note didn't fade. In fact, the ripple effect it had on Dinah's life became increasingly clear. She realized that her life had shifted in that moment, not because of the tip, but because someone had cared enough to acknowledge her, to remind her that even in the darkest days, there was still a glimmer of light. The rest of her shift felt almost surreal. It was as though everything she did was infused with a renewed sense of purpose. Her movements felt more deliberate, more grounded. The tasks that had once seemed like burdens now felt lighter. Even the most difficult customers no longer seemed quite as daunting. The words of the note echoed in her mind, "Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." By the time the cafe had quieted for the evening, Dinah was still holding the receipt, her heart full in a way it hadn't been before. The note wasn't just a message from one person. It felt like a lifeline, a thread that connected her to something greater. As she made her way home that night, the street seemed different. The usual rush of cars, the honking horns, the hurried footsteps of strangers, all of it seemed distant, as though her perspective had shifted. The weight of the world had not disappeared, but somehow, it didn't feel as heavy anymore. When she entered her apartment, the first thing she did was pull out the receipt again. She read the note once more, savoring the words. Barron's kindness had cracked open something in her, something she had closed off a long time ago. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation, the acknowledgement of her humanity. That night, as Dinah lay in bed, the words from the note played in her mind, comforting her in a way nothing had for a long time. She held on to the belief that things could change, that brighter days might indeed be coming. She didn't know when or how, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to believe it. The following day, as she walked into work, something felt different. The usual routine was punctuated by a soft undercurrent of attention. Her co-workers greeted her with smiles, some offering quiet congratulations, though no one spoke of the note aloud. It wasn't necessary. They all knew, somehow. They all knew that Dinah had experienced something that day that went beyond a generous tip. It was as if Barron's kindness had planted a seed in the cafe, and everyone who passed through felt its gentle warmth. As the day unfolded, people came and went, sipping their coffee and chatting. But for Dinah, the conversations felt more genuine. There was a connection in the air, an unspoken understanding that small acts of kindness can have a profound impact. And as she worked, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a sense of being where she was meant to be. She didn't need the world to know her story, nor did she seek validation. The note was hers to keep, a small but mighty reminder that, no matter how invisible life sometimes felt, she was not forgotten. That simple act of kindness from someone she never expected to notice had reminded her that hope is real and sometimes it arrives in the quietest, most unexpected ways. And for Dinah, that was enough. It was more than enough. As she tucked the note into her apron pocket, it became something more than just a piece of paper. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small or unnoticed, could have a profound impact. It was a tangible reminder that brighter days were ahead. As the day unfolded, people came and went, sipping their coffee and chatting. But for Dinah, the conversations felt more genuine. There was a connection in the air, an unspoken understanding that small acts of kindness can have a profound impact. And as she worked, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a sense of being where she was meant to be. She didn't need the world to know her story, nor did she seek validation. The note was hers to keep, a small but mighty reminder that, no matter how invisible life sometimes felt, she was not forgotten. That simple act of kindness from someone she never expected to notice had reminded her that hope is real and sometimes it arrives in the quietest, most unexpected ways. And for Dinah, that was enough. It was more than enough. As she tucked the note into her apron pocket, it became something more than just a piece of paper. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small or unnoticed, could have a profound impact. It was a tangible reminder that brighter days were ahead,